This podcast is brought to you by the Albany Public Library main branch and the generosity of listeners like you. What is a podcast? God, Daddy, these people talk as much as you do. Razib Khan's Unsupervised Learning.
Thanks for listening to the ungated version of the Unsupervised Learning podcast. If you want to read some essays on some of these topics, please check out razib.substack.com. Again, that's razib.substack.com. Thank you.
You know that genetics plays a huge role in our health, and more people are using genetic testing to determine risk for diseases like cancer for themselves and their kids than ever before. So I want to tell you about Orchid. It's the only company that does whole genome testing for embryos, testing before your child is born. If you're doing IVF, this is a clear choice now because now you can reduce risk for thousands of single gene disorders, including heritable forms of autism, pediatric cancers, and birth defects. Check them out at orchidhealth.com.
Hey, everybody. This is Razib with the Unsupervised Learning podcast. And I don't do this very often. I'm going to do it again. I did it recently. A month ago. I am asking everyone who is listening to this podcast and enjoys it, especially if you are not a paid subscriber to Unsupervised Learning, my Substack, please review and rate well this podcast because it gets more visibility that way, and it can be recommended in other people's feeds and other similar podcasts and whatnot. I know it might take you a minute. But I think that's, a good payback for the content here, especially if you are a listener to one of the free options, of which there are many. And, if you're subscribed to Spotify or Apple Podcasts, you can also find it on YouTube and then various other platforms. So it's just not one place. You can find it on Libsyn as well, which is where the free version is hosted. So with that logistical issue out of the way, I want to introduce our guest today, my friend, Dr. Colin Wright. Colin is a fellow at the Manhattan Institute, and he is also the author of Reality's Last Stand, which is a Substack on this platform. Substack, this is where the podcast is first posted, if you are on the free feed. And I also like to take some credit for Colin being on Substack because I did prod him, and now he is one of the top science Substacks. Like me, Colin, it's like we're up there. So I don't know. I'm proud to have him on the platform, and we're friends. We've known each other for about 6 years now. I think I will start out really quickly by introducing how I introduced myself to Colin, which Colin knows the story. He wrote a piece, I think it was fall of 2018. Was that right? Fall of 2018?
Yep.
For Quillette on sex and gender and how sex is real. And I dropped into his DMs on Twitter, and he didn't have very many followers back then. I dropped into his DMs and I said, "Your life is changing." And he's like, "I don't know what you're talking about." And I was like, "You will." And I was right, wasn't I, Colin?
You were right on. I still had this hope that if I just calmly explain to people like why I disagree with them, then everything will just be fine. That's what scientists do. Nope.
Yeah. Yeah. So Colin is trained as an evolutionary ecologist. Is that can I say that? Behavioral ecologist.
Yeah. It's
behavioral ecologist.
Most accurate. Yeah.
Yeah. You have your PhD. Is it from Santa Barbara?
Yep. UC Santa Barbara.
Yeah, and you are from California. I have been to your beautiful childhood home. I hope your parents are doing well.
They're doing good.
Breaking the fourth wall or whatever. Colin and I are friends, but if anyone has any cursory knowledge of my social media or anything like that, I think you will know that. So I don't want to pretend like you're just another person on this podcast, part of the content machine that is unsupervised learning. So you started out as an academic, basically, at least within the last decade. And in fact, like we overlapped at UC Davis for I think a year. You were an undergrad and I was a grad student, but we didn't know each other. So it was my first year, I think, in grad school, and it was your last year as an undergrad there. So you have this academic path all lined out, and then obviously, things changed, and we're going to talk about that. But the first thing I want to ask you about is your former PhD advisor. The last time we talked, you couldn't talk too much about it. It was still really fresh and in the news, although, it's not a super interesting tale of academic. Well, I think I can say fraud. I don't think it's alleged anymore. I think he's been, basically found to have engaged in academic fraud, manufacturing data and fabrication. He still claims that there are errors and mistakes. I actually read his apology recently because he's taken a turn into a new line of work, and I just think this is a very, very amusing fact or datum to enter into the record as we go into the gender wars and all these other things you're involved in. So what's Dr. Pruitt doing now?
It's not completely clear. He was doing some teaching I think at a high school somewhere in Florida. He's since been writing a series. I think it's like a multi-volume series of fantasy novels. I don't know the exact story, but there's a lot of sort of politics involved. It's set in like sort of I think a medieval time, but there's like a lot of magic going along. There's giant magical cats in this world. There's backstabbing. The reviews actually look pretty decent, but that's because he's has a career of writing good fiction in in science and now in science fiction, which was his genre all along.
Well, so I'm going to say, so he has been alleged, and now it seems to be whatever. The authorities have come down and concluded that he did engage in data fabrication, but he was still your PhD, or he was your PhD advisor, right?
Yeah, he was my PhD advisor. We had no inkling this was going on while we were there. One of the papers that this occurred on was, on data that he had this policy where if you're a new graduate student in his lab, he had all this backlog of data that he collected, or he said that he collected while he was a postdoc. Just data. He was in the field just doing stuff, and then he would give this data to new incoming graduate students so they could write sort of a first paper, get their feet wet, writing a real paper, right when they had joined the lab. And so we analyze it, write it up, and we get first author on the paper. Just good practice, because that's what scientists do. You analyze data, you write papers. And so this data that he handed me like 2 weeks, after I'd freshed into his graduate program, this was probably in 2013. Turns out this data was completely fabricated. We looked back on the data after other patterns came out, and it was just, okay, yeah, this is clearly done. There's a lot of cut and pasted things. There's no biological explanation or methodological explanation for these things. And unfortunately, that was my first paper ever, and that was in PNAS. It was a huge paper that is currently, we tried to retract it as soon as all this stuff came out. But he kind of lawyered up and threw the wrenches into all the gears of the process of things getting retracted. So now that the investigation finally came out and concluded that, yes, indeed, that there was fraud committed, we're now moving forward with this retraction. But, this is used by, my enemies online is, they'll just throw these out like, oh, look at all these retractions. Like, what's Swipe Right doing? This is just stuff that my advisor did, and no data that I've ever collected or any of the colleagues that have collected have been shown to have these similar anomalies. So, yeah, we're glad that he's finally sort of been brought to justice on this whole thing.
Yeah, I was asking you about that because and I did. What was his first name again?
Jonathan.
Yeah, I have met Jonathan. I remember meeting him once at UC Davis. I think he was there as a postdoc, maybe while we were there.
I think, I overlapped with him too, at least a year.
That was that year. He was postdoc, and I think he might have been the pop bio postdoc that year. The group itself has a joint postdoc. I think he might have been that year, and I was at some dinner anyway, or lunch, and he interrupted the conversation and he said hi real quick, and he was very energetic, very fast talking guy. Do you think, despite all of his data fabrication, I mean, did you learn some science from him? I mean, did you get skills? I mean, was this kind of a situation where he wasn't a total fraud, but he added some fraud into the sausage, so to speak?
Yeah, that's a good question, because honestly, there's not every advisor is perfect and everything like that, and there are things he could have definitely improved upon. But overall, I think he's like a legitimate genius and a creative person. Like, that was the most baffling part about this entire fraud investigation and conclusion, was that he was brilliant enough where he could have been just a very successful scientist, had a good reputation, could have still published a lot of papers. Wouldn't have maybe been in Nature and all that stuff, but it would have been solid papers. He could have been a very successful scientist just if he hadn't done the fraud, because he was incredibly knowledgeable of literature. He was an incredible actual work ethic. He just sort of had this ability to just spend hours upon hours on end just writing papers. He did work hard in the field when we were out there with him. And he was incredibly creative when coming up with ideas on how to, design experiments and test for things. It's unfortunately at the end, he just put his foot on the scale. And it was just baffling. It was more just like this, trying to climb the ladder faster than, he would have normally, but he would have eventually probably got up that ladder. He just, would have taken him a decade longer, but that's kind of how science is supposed to work. Yeah.
Well, I want to read actually his website. I think Black Chateau Enterprises. I don't know. Maybe it's well. So I think this is a PR agency for the Amber Menhir, his first book in his series. I want to read. It's kind of funny. It's kind of not funny. It's like, I don't know if it would be so funny if you didn't know the context of who this guy is, but I'm going to read with the PR blurb, which I think he probably wrote a lot of it. Avoiding the usual expectations of fantasy by way of satire, humor, and a race of nefarious evil cats. The first in Jonathan Pruitt's The Shadows of the Monolith series, The Amber Menhir, arrives this October from Spinner Loom Press, and I think that's his own self-publishing imprint. Having earned the title of the world's most infamous spider biologist, Pruitt has penned a grimdark fantasy looming the academic and scientific communities while also offering an immersive, diverse, and fast-paced story. Quote, I can be far more honest in fiction than I ever could have ever contemplated in nonfiction, Pruitt says. What exactly is Menhir? Found across the globe, menhirs are mysterious, ancient, imposing monoliths that prove evidence of a civilization's existence. They're often the subject of superstition, just like the magical institutions that make up this world. Whether they stand as pinnacles of grandeur and discovery or blemishes of political pestilence will be up to the reader, explains Pruitt. Readers visit a modern-day grimdark fairy tale where reality bends and twists with plenty of humor and profound insights. In writing The Amber Menhir, Pruitt drew upon his many life experiences, from traversing the rugged landscapes of South Africa and Namibia to savoring the enchantment of Australia and Canada. Jonathan Pruitt's metamorphosis from a prodigious scientific mind into a fantasy author is a testament to reinvention, as he proves in The Amber Menhir, The Shadows of the Monolith, Book 1. Okay, so it's available for a reading copy on NetGalley and for pre-order on Amazon as of the press release. So that was, the whole thing is kind of like a little weird. I honestly, I do not condone, obviously, what he did as a scientist, but this is not a bitter guy. It seems like he's trying to figure something else out, and this is more honest to maybe his spirit of seeking glory and fame and the spotlight than as a scientist, where that should be secondary. But really, it was important to him, and so he cut a lot of corners. That's the way I'm going to say it mildly. So that's that. I do wonder if maybe there is going to be a cat character based on you in there, Colin.
I've kind of wanted to read the series to see if I can identify people in his life that he talks about, and maybe myself or something in one of these characters. It's honestly it's probably a good book, because he used to be our Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Master. We used to play that because we were super nerds in graduate school, and he would just create these amazing fantasy worlds, from scratch to lead us through these what do they call it, the role play worlds,
RPGs.
Yeah, RPG. Well, I can't remember the name of what's it called? The worlds you create in Dungeons and Dragons. I should know this.
Okay, I have no idea. I'm not that much of a nerd.
Yeah, he'd create the adventures. That's what I was looking for. Yeah, so it's probably a good book, but I don't know if I can give it a full endorsement.
Yeah, you condemn his science, but kind of curious about his fantastical fiction prowess, right?
Yeah. Maybe I'll check it out.
Well, let's pivot away from fantasy. So in 2018, you write this piece in Quillette. I think I read it, but it was kind of boring because, why is someone writing this? Talk about where that's coming from, because some of the listeners would be like, "Wait, why would Razib say something that rude?" But you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a lot of comments. Sometimes I go back and look at what people said, and everyone's just like, I was basically just nodding along for every sentence because every part of the essay was nothing controversial. It was just the most basic biology you can imagine. Basically, that biological sex is real. There's only two sexes. People who identify as one sex, as sex that they're not, aren't really that sex. Stable reality type stuff, things we've long discovered that have just suddenly became taboo to say, that a lot of people didn't want to say, or they would just couch it in sort of this cryptic nonsense. It was just a piece that, sex is real and it matters that we acknowledge that it's real, and sex isn't a spectrum. Intersex people are not a third sex, just basic stuff like that. But still be compassionate to people who are having, distress about their, so-called gender identity or have gender dysphoria. It was just a compassionate piece, but scientifically accurate piece, and argued that we don't need to throw out reality in order to, have compassion for people who are going through certain types of, mental distress.
Yeah, I mean, you're being very careful of mental distress. I know you've been attacked as I don't know, calling for the genocide of trans people. I've just seen weird things. I think they wanted to they've canceled you multiple times, quote unquote. They, as in, people like Kevin Bird, who a little bit more low profile now. There's new people, but there's always someone like that. Basically, I think you said something about social contagion, and they said that this was genocidal or something. Turns out that I think a lot of people now uncontroversially accept the social contagion is happening, right?
Yes. I mean, it was pretty uncontroversial at the time. There's plenty of things that we call social contagion. It's not, they tried to spin it as me saying that trans people were a virus or something like that, or, it's just ridiculous. But, we've known of social contagions in the social sciences with certain things like anorexia and, just all types of things like that, where it's, it's something that's detrimental to you, but it still spreads, even though it can be harmful through mimetic reasons. So yeah.
All right, let's get into the normative aspects in a little while, but let's back up, and I want to do some definitions for the boomers out there, because there's a lot of you guys, and thank you for your subscriptions. I'm not gonna lie, you guys definitely are supporting this podcast, supporting the Substack at a higher level, probably because you've made money and whatever. So I'm not using it as a pejorative. Literally, I know that there's a lot of boomers that don't know what Colin is talking about in the detail. So, Colin, what is? I'm just going to give you a term, and you need to explain it to in boomer language. What is a cis het trans woman?
Well, there's a lot of contradictory terms in there in the gender ideology, but basically they view people not just as just normal people, that we all have this prefix of either being cis or trans. If you're trans, which maybe is a word that we're more familiar with, in their world, this means that you have a gender identity that is something other than, and as they would say, the sex you were assigned at birth, but we would just say as your biological sex. And if you're cis, CIS, in front of your name, this is someone who identifies with the sex they were assigned at birth, or their sex. So you're a male and you identify as a male.
So what I said is by definition not possible. You cannot be a cis trans. Can you be a cis trans person?
No, you cannot. Those are
They're
mutually
exclusive categories.
Yeah,
So,
I
what
suppose
is it?
if you're gender fluid, maybe some days you can be cis and some days you can be trans. But to my knowledge, you can't be
That's what I'm
both at the
saying.
same time.
Okay, so you're gender fluid. You can be cis or trans, depending on how you feel. And then also the trans woman. The woman is what you are. The trans is implying the transition. Because I know a lot of people get trans man and trans woman confused because they're like, which one is it? So the man or the woman is not what you are born. It is what you are or identify as. And trans is just referring to the fact that you went through a transition.
Yes. Well, I mean, that's what I say. Being trans implies a transition. In the world of gender woo, you don't need to actually transition. It's just an identity. You are trans as long as you just happen to identify as the opposite sex. No transition needed. So yeah, that's part of the upside down.
Yeah, again, like it starts to get a lot of this has like been a moving target. I think it's even changed over the 6 years you've been on the scene. Okay, so we have like all these kind of convoluted definitions. You're saying sex is not a continuum, and intersex is not a sex. I know that look. I'm not gonna lie. Here again, I'll give you an anecdote. I have a friend. He's liberal, pretty normal guy. But he's not. He's not. I wouldn't say he's woke. He's definitely like skeptical of some of the trans and all these things. On the other hand, he's not like me or you. He tries to be more open. He's still he's in academia, whatever. And one time he told me that he disagrees with some of the things you're saying, and he wishes he had time to write it up. And this was like literally 5 years ago. He still hasn't had time to write it up. I don't really understand like how you're wrong about things on the science, but there's apparently like some details. Talk about what your ideas about sex and gender are, just so we know.
Yeah, so I criticize what I call and what people now sort of call gender ideology, because basically what this ideology says is that whether you're a boy or a girl or a man or a woman has nothing to do with your biology and everything to do with how you identify according to these stereotypes of masculinity and femininity. So you can be if you're really effeminate male, then you're actually a woman. If you're really a masculine woman, you're actually a man. I just think that's a regressive way to look at things, and this is this idea that a butch lesbian is no longer a woman because of being butch and attracted to women, that they're now a man. This is completely ridiculous. And then so a lot of activists are trying to blur this boundary between males and females in order to assert that everyone should just be able to identify with whatever sex they want to and have all the benefits that come with that. Being able to compete in the sports category of the opposite sex and access the spaces that are for the opposite sex. And there's a whole gender medicine thing which says that because sex is this social construct that's related to just various body parts, we can just change those body parts and we can change your sex to match your gender identity. So all this weird stuff. So I just have basically made a career out of reminding people what males and females actually are. It has nothing to do with whether you have breasts or whether you have facial hair or how deep your voice is and all this stuff. But it just really has everything to do with the type of gamete that your primary sex organs have the function to produce. If males and females are defined by the relative size of gametes, sperm versus ova. And that's just sort of the way it is. That's the universal definition of males and females across all of life, or at least any species that produces sexually with sperm and ova. So that's all I'm really trying to say, is maintain this biological reality, and that because there's only two gametes, there's only sperm and ova, there's no intermediate. Therefore, there are only two sexes that an individual can be. And if someone who presents with a rare complex intersex condition, to the extent that they might be sexually ambiguous, that's fine. But sexual ambiguity isn't a third sex. And so sex is still binary in that sense because there's still only two. That's really what I've been saying for the last 5 years, again and again and again.
Yeah, so I think one of the issues that crops up here is it seems like implicitly, what you're saying is, I'm not like I'm trying to restate what you're saying in a different way, but I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but the whole idea and the definition and the categorization of intersex implies the two other sexes.
Yeah. I mean, so intersex
Like
people.
you couldn't have intersex would not make sense without the two other sexes. The two other sexes will make sense without the idea of intersex. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's accurate. And just the idea that, an intersex person, just because someone might be truly sexually ambiguous, and I think that could be theoretically possible that someone could have such a complex, ambiguous primary sex organs or something that you couldn't really say whether they're male or female. That doesn't mean they're a third sex, because there's not like a third type of, sex cell gamete that they're producing. They're not some third viable gamete producer out there. So regardless of how many people can be sexually ambiguous, I mean, it could be, even if half of all humans fell into this category of being just bizarrely sexually ambiguous, it would still be the case that there's only two sexes, because there's only two gametes. So I think that's an important point. Yeah.
All right, so you're talking about sex. So, by the end of graduate school, like 2016, it was starting to become commonplace to talk about, and this was not something that was discussed like really that much at the beginning of graduate school. I think it came out of, Judith Butler and gender ideology and stuff. So there's a distinction between sex and gender. Sex is the biological reality, and gender is about presentation and all sorts of other things. Honestly, I didn't care too much about gender because, like, Colin, if you want to run around in a skirt, I'm just going to call it a kilt. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not going to lie. Like, I don't give a shit. Like, I was never a goth. I don't care what you look like. Like, tell me what you think, what's between your ears, not like what's you're wearing. But hey, that's just me. I understand it matters a lot for other people. Their earrings, their piercings, their clothes, their hairstyle. I get it. Okay. That's what I understood. But it seems like over the last decade, there's been a progressive conflation of sex and gender to the point where, I mean, a lot of these arguments and discussions are very confusing because I think people are they're acting like sex itself is malleable. And I'm hearing things about, I'll give an example that's I find interesting. Like many years ago, Jordan Peterson said something about lobsters and monogamy or something. I don't remember. And it was all like the rage. I wasn't paying too close attention to it because it was like, whatever. And it was, arguably naturalistic fallacy. They're like, why are you talking about lobsters? But now I'm hearing all about like fish that change their sexes, which, I read about when I was a kid. This is like a new thing. This is not a new thing. But again, like what have, Pisces to do with man? I don't know, So it's like naturalistic fallacy cropping up, like this sort of thing. We're not fish. You don't go to Alaska and change your sex, But can you talk about the fish and the sex change in other organisms and how that applies or doesn't apply to humans? Mammals in particular. Yeah. I think mammals in particular exhibit like strong dimorphism when it comes to sex. And I'm not talking about like size or something. I'm like talking about like, gamete production, gamete organs, our genitals are very different,
Yeah. So there's a lot of arguments that people will try to use to somehow suggest that humans can change their sex or that we should let people just identify into any sex category they want to. And a really common one, you see this happen all the time, especially during Pride Month. You'll get organizations posting things about the amazing sex changing abilities of certain fish. They'll talk about clownfish or the Maori wrasse, and these are fish that are what are called sequential hermaphrodites, which means that they are one sex at one stage in life and they turn into the other sex at a later stage in life. Humans, we're called gonochoric species. That's a fancy word to say that our sex exists in separate individuals. We are not hermaphrodites, so our individuals are either male or female, and they stay male or female throughout their entire life. Our sex organs develop once they're present through our entire life, and so we can describe individuals as just sort of being male and female. It's a static thing that's just what you are. But some fish they might start out male, and then eventually, either through environmental cues or sometimes through cues from how big their bodies become, will trigger sort of them to change their sex, and they'll produce the other type of gamete. The idea that somehow sequential hermaphrodites debunk the idea that sex is binary is completely nonsense, because if you think about it, well, how do you know when a fish has changed their sex? It's because they've gone from producing one type of gamete to producing another type of gamete. There's only two gametes. They're either male or female. So the existence of hermaphrodites, even a simultaneous hermaphrodite, an individual who's producing both sperm or ova at the same time, this really just reinforces the fact that there's two sexes. These are just two different reproductive strategies. And yeah, sometimes one individual can be exhibiting and performing both of these reproductive strategies at once, or they can, exhibit these strategies at different times in their life. But there's still only two fundamental reproductive strategies, and that's why there's only two sexes and why you can say that sex is binary. So again, all these examples they try to use to dismiss the binary nature of sex actually just reinforce it even more. And then they try to have these ideas feedback and saying, well, because fish can change sex, or here's some slugs who are producing both gametes at the same time, somehow this needs to imply, or this is liberatory for the LGBTQ plus movement, seeming to suggest that if fish can do it, then so can humans. That's just a non sequitur. I don't even know how to respond to that by saying it's nonsense.
Yeah. Well, so I just for the listener and the viewer who doesn't follow this closely, which isn't most, I think some of our arguments and discussions, it's weird. So a lot of these ideas and concepts have bled over from, gender ideology, gender theory. A lot of this began with the book Gender Trouble, Feminism and the Subversion of Identity by Judith Butler. Butler is she's a literary theorist. She's a queer theorist, a philosopher. And she's also won awards for the worst academic writing. That was actually how I originally found out. I remember when I started reading your stuff or other people, Gender Trouble would come up periodically, or Butler would come up. Butler is also, by the way, a they them now. So just if I get confused on pronoun, I don't know. I'm trying to be offensive. Just like it was she for a long time. But in any case, anyway, so big queer theorist, probably one of the bigger ones of the late 20th century, and obviously fourth now of the 21st century. And she has this idea that gender is performativity, like you perform, which again, like presupposes certain gender stereotypes. Where do those come from, right? I mean, wearing a skirt is female performative in the United States, but not in Scotland. Actually, not for the ancient Greeks. For the ancient Greeks, like wearing, like I know some of the listeners and viewers and whatever, like know. I think tunics should make a comeback. We don't ride on horses anymore, so we don't really need trousers all the time, especially in warmer climates. So just putting it out there. Yeah, trousers were invented by the Scythians, okay? Because they rode on horses. Because they're more convenient to ride on horses. That's why trousers got popular, okay? Any case, sorry, I don't want to like go on like an anti-trouser. I like trousers, but like it's just like
you can just wear them. If you just want to wear a dress, Razib, you can do it. I'm not going to judge you.
Okay, are you trying to say that I have like ulterior motives here? Anyway, it's a tunic. Okay, it's a tunic. It's not a dress. But
call it whatever you want.
Yeah. But anyway, so the idea that it's performativity, so it's obviously applied to humans, but then like all this stuff with other animals gets smuggled in. We're just like, what the hell? And it's like very confusing to follow all the different arguments. And that's why I rely on people like you, to be candid, because you can track it. And a lot of the people, there's people like Leo Sapir, I think, at the Manhattan Institute, who argue about these things. But it's great that you're an evolutionary biologist, which one of the reasons they bring up the Pruitt affair is to undermine your credibility there. But it's weird that now you need to be a PhD, really zoologist, to understand what sex is. Right? It's weird.
Yeah. It is. I mean, it is weird. Well, you don't need to be one to understand what it is, but you need to be one to be taken seriously or something. It's ridiculous, because I mean, it's a very simple concept of what sex is, and everyone's intuition is more correct than you get from the queer theorists out there about what sex is. again, you're right. It all started with sort of Judith Butler and talking about gender as a performance type thing. I think she had like a throwaway line in there that like, oh, maybe we'll find out that sex is just as performative as gender, or it's just as much of a social construct. And like that single line just sort of people ran with it. And then the likes of Anne Fausto Sterling went with it even more.
So you brought up Anne Fausto Sterling, and I'm really glad because I've seen this name before. It's a very, very distinctive name, and that's actually why I remember it. I don't remember who she is. It's a she. This person. You have to like ask these things now, but
it's an actual.
I don't want to miss. Yeah. Okay. So I don't want to, because I don't know anything about this person, but I see this person cited all the time about sexes and gender and stuff like that. Tell me about this person, what they wrote, why it's significant, and why you have to rebut this person's work.
Yeah, so Anne Fausto Sterling, I believe she's at Brown University, and has been really responsible for sort of taking the musings of Judith Butler about sex being a social construct, and has really sort of tried to give this scientific backing, mainly by just promoting the existence of people who have intersex conditions or differences of sexual development. She's responsible for claiming that, up to 1.7% or even over 2% of people aren't definitively male or female. This comes from a study that she participated in where they literally defined males and females as like individuals who adhere to a Platonic ideal of being male or female. And so they had very, when the baby is born, how long is its penis? If it's, not within this one range, we're going to consider this a deviation from the Platonic ideal. And these people were considered to have DSDs or be partially intersex. If
Wait. So let's just say you got a micropene, okay?
These are considered intersex in her definition.
So micropenes are intersex. What if a woman has a extremely substantial labia?
They had a size length cutoff for how big the clitoris could be for you to be considered no longer female. And they would even consider, like, you could even have a male with a very large penis, but if you had a condition called hypospadias, which is where the urethra sort of doesn't come out of the very tip, but it may be slightly on underside, this would be considered an intersex condition in her widely overly broad definition. Where in reality, like a more clinically relevant definition of being intersex is like the appearance of actual sexual ambiguity or some mismatch between your sort of internal organs and the way you look on the outside.
Wait. Yeah. Let me jump in. So androgen insensitivity syndrome, which there are a variety of them. So from what little I know, it's basically a situation where there might be a mutation, breakage on SRY, the sex determining region on the Y. And so you don't exhibit masculinization starting in the second trimester or late first trimester, I think. That is normal. And so some of these individuals, they're born, they have internal testes. A lot of them are flat chested, and they're taller, but they are more female presenting is what I would say. So would you count that as intersex?
I think it's okay to call it an intersex condition in like a strict clinical sense, but I would consider these individuals from a purely biological perspective as being male. I think CAIS is a male disorder of sexual development. And it's not. I don't think anything's wrong with their SRY gene. They don't respond to androgens. Their androgen receptor in all their cells is non-functioning, and so they have high levels of testosterone in the male range. Their bodies just don't respond to it, and so they develop. Their genitals look 100% female. They look 100% female. You wouldn't be able to tell just by looking at them. I think they are, as you mentioned, like slightly taller, but that's really about it. And a lot of them don't even know, or at least they used to not know until they were about the time of going through puberty and they wouldn't get a period. Then, they get an ultrasound or something, and it's just like, oh, you have testes instead. So these are examples of people who sort of have complex conditions and where biological reality might not need to match on legal reality. They're usually legally considered female, and I think that's probably an accurate good thing to do. And Fausto Sterling just uses this overly broad definition of what's intersex to say that, oh, look how non-binary sex is, where, the binary of sex has nothing to do with the degree to which people could be sexually ambiguous and everything to do with the fact there's only two sexes you can be. There's only sperm and ova. And then Anne Foster Sterling also wrote some article in the New York Times and also like in an academic one about there being 5 sexes, males, females, herms, merms, and firms, which is like female pseudohermaphrodites, male pseudohermaphrodites, and hermaphrodites or something like that. Again, just trying to draw lines around various intersex conditions and trying to say that these are independent sexes, even though they're not producing a third or fourth or fifth type of gamete. So it's just a lot of hand waving. It's a lot of obfuscation. She then has since sort of said like, oh, I was just being tongue in cheek with that. And I called her out on, it was Twitter at the time, now X. And she just like scolded me like for calling this out and saying that like, well, all her, followers, adherents apparently didn't get the memo that it was just a tongue in cheek thing. And this is still are you going to retract this paper? Apparently not. So yeah, I mean, these ideas are very powerful. They've had a lot of consequences, and we're still dealing with them right now. And now it's gone beyond Anne Foster Sterling, and it's you get these ideas in Nature about the sex spectrum. You get Hormones and Behavior has a whole series on the non-binary nature of sex. Integrative and Comparative Biology is writing articles about this, like real. Well, I don't think they're real scientific papers, but they're in real scientific journals that are publishing these things, and it's just like completely incorrect ideas about what sex is in nature. So yeah, it's really like a full court press, I say, of just sort of the sex pseudoscience just spreading like wildfire. And there's like almost no pushback in the academic literature, except for, a peer-reviewed book chapter I have with Emma Hilton. And there's some more in the works right now, but we just need to get...
Why not? Why is there no pushback?
Well, I've known people that have submitted things and they just get desk rejected from these journals, or people don't want to talk about these things because they see what happens to all the people who have talked about this. They see the arrows I've taken from speaking out against this. It, caused me to leave academia. They've seen Heather Hying, who talks about this. She can only get by on her podcast with Brett. I have a Substack, so I can't be canceled anymore. Emma Hilton, she's fortunate enough to have a really robust department that has defended her, but they've tried to come after her and get her fired. It's just not worth a lot of people's time to just try to combat this, because they have to make it the rest of their career, and they're forever going to be labeled as some transphobic bigot, and it's just not worth it in their opinion to do this stuff.
Do you think do you think it's getting a little bit easier though? Like, do you think it's peaked?
Yeah, definitely. It's easier now than it's ever been. We have people like Jerry Coyne, who's always been supportive of my work, big name in evolutionary biology. Just recently, Richard Dawkins promoted one of my talks I gave on the sex binary. He said it was superbly clear and totally correct. So I'm just going to flip off all my former colleagues who tried to say I was a bigot promoting pseudoscience, because I know they're big Dawkins fans too. It's much easier
they were. I think Dawkins is, his status has changed a little now that he's like off the reservation on some of the new progressive stuff,
Yeah, I mean, just because he's considered to be off the reservation, just because he's pushed back against precisely the same things I've been pushing back on. Mm-hmm. But, there's no world can you paint Dawkins as some, far right, extremist or anything like that. And I just know a lot of people respected him when I was in academia. So,
that was, things change very fast, I think. We'll see. So I do have to say, though, Dawkins is 82 and Jerry Coyne is 74.
And it also shows. Sorry, it also shows that like the only reason they can talk about it too is because they're retired and they've already had their career. And Jerry Coyne is just receiving retirement money from University of Chicago, and Dawkins is wealthy from both academia and all his books. So yeah, it's only people who have the ability to not be canceled who can really speak candidly on this topic.
Well, you know a lot of people still in academia, I'm sure, like in terms of people in touch with you. Do you think that, my personal experience is a lot of young academics, and young as in like under 30, are very, very socially radical. on all the identity, race, gender, etc., sex, and or whatever. I don't know all the different identity categories they have. I don't know all of them right now, but the main ones are sex, gender, and race, right? So I mean, I do think that like it seems to have peaked, but there's a massive cohort, and all of the older Gen X professors are going to retire at some point soon. Not soon, but within the next generation. Doc is not going to live forever. Bless his heart, as they say, but he's not going to live forever. These older guys are not going to live forever, and then they're going to be replaced by who? I mean,
yeah.
What do you hear?
My worry. There's a big pipeline problem, like big time. A lot of these people, as you mentioned, they retired, after the whole summer of 2020 George Floyd stuff. A lot of people retired or were fired for having any views that weren't super progressive. So yeah, I mean, it's in the pipeline is really bad because, as you mentioned, like the more based ones are going to be retiring, and the people who are beginning their careers down this pathway tend to be pretty radical. I've had people that I've worked with in labs, undergrads who had been field assistants for me, who were brilliant, and they would have made amazing scientists. Have told me that they're no longer pursuing a career in science because of how woke everything is. How they don't think they'll be treated the same, and they can't say accurate things about biology. They don't want to fill out DEI statements, all that type of stuff. So they've really rigged it. So they'll have their
tell for the listeners. I mean, I have a lot of non-academic listeners what DEI is.
So DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it's one of the reasons I left academia, because you're forced to fill out or make a statement. You have like your CV, you have your research statement, sometimes a teaching statement, and then oftentimes they want you to fill out a 1 or 2 page DEI statement that says basically they need you to express fealty to these orthodoxies of progressive leftism about critical race theory type stuff, and how minorities are held back, and you need to express a detailed knowledge of the various ways the different types of identities of race and sex intersect and produce these oppressed classes and all this stuff. So if you reject sort of this worldview, which I did, you're basically forced to lie about it, because this is what's used as a litmus test for applicants to say, oh, this person didn't write a very good DEI statement, or they wrote something good, but it's not in line with sort of the progressive orthodoxy on it. And, those are just a good way to do a first filter of people who are applying. And I mean, universities like Berkeley specifically do a filter first and foremost on DEI policies before they even hand the applicants on to the department to even make judgments based on their academic merits. So yeah, it's a big problem.
So I want to ask you about, I guess like so everyone knows this because I always tweet about this because I'm a fame whore. But you did a chart about a political spectrum, and it's the chart where basically there's one guy who's standing on the left side, and then the left runs away, and the guy on the right is like laughing at the guy on the left, and like Elon Musk retweeted it, so it's become like a big meme. I think Ben Shapiro also retweeted or mentioned it, and I always tell people, like, I'm the guy on the right, because I have been telling you since we got to know each other that you will be voting Republican at some point, and you would really and like just for context, you are you're, I don't know if I was going to say new atheist, whatever, that's an old school term, but you're standard issue atheist. You're kind of a lib. You're kind of liberal, actually.
Yeah.
Maybe not like Bernie Sanders liberal, but you're not
I
a
voted
centrist.
I voted for Bernie in the primaries in 2016. So
yeah, so you are a Bernie Sanders. You were a Bernie Sanders liberal, but on some of these social issues, you've diverged, and some of this stuff is like, mood affiliation is not the right word, but it's, you became heterodox on sex, and now you're talking to me, which, like, far right-wing provocateur, as you've engaged with Bo Weingard, who, I mean, Bo's got like one. I don't want to get into it, but you know what I'm saying. Like he's gotten into like one particular track right now. So like all of these, kind of like heterodox thought criminal, like kind of these, taboo people, you're rubbing shoulders with now. Just because you said there was a sex binary. Okay, so that's where you started, and now, you're an independent now. You and your partner, Christina Buttons. I think I can say that she's your partner because you guys make it pretty obvious on social media, but you guys are both basically lefties. Christina was even woke presenting. Like when she first followed me on Insta or on Twitter and X, I thought it was a woke person because of the way she looked in the picture.
Me too. I thought I was being catfished. It took me a while to actually respond into with anything
So,
with like hitting on her or anything like that because I thought it was going to be catfished.
You guys are basically I don't know, like I don't think you guys can be like classified because I know Christina worked with Matt Walsh for a while and then she left the Daily Wire, like their whole enterprise, because she is not a down the line social conservative in that way. She has very specific focus on the gender ideology issue. You too, although you have engaged, I think, more in broader culture war stuff with other people, even though you don't talk about it too much. Obviously, I think I know where you stand on DEI. You probably don't disagree with a lot of the things Chris Rufo says now about, higher ed, so what's happened to you? How do you feel right now? Are you politically homeless? All of that. Just like talk about this journey from being an atheist, Bernie Sanders supporting person in 2016 to 8 years later where you find yourself.
Yeah. And it's been kind of wild, and it's funny because I've described it as sort of like a political journey standing still. It's like I didn't really move anywhere as my cartoon depicts. It's just like my position has been static, or at least for the most part. And it's just been the political ground shifting sort of beneath my feet, where I've had the same, sort of principles about, adhering to biological reality. I used to debate with the creationists, intelligent design people because of their wacko views on evolution. I've always been like a supporter of equal rights and, a lot of feminist causes, for the fact of their, their right to vote and suffrage and all that stuff. Really great. The left view on race that used to be sort of the Martin Luther King judge people by the content of their character rather than the color of their skin type of stuff. And then just being a very pro free speech activist, since I'm an atheist, I think that's a good thing. History shows that, it's good to have free speech so you can kind of speak truth to power. I think free speech, academic freedom is definitely needed in the universities. And this is why I wanted to be an academic, because I thought it was probably the best environment if you wanted to have honest, frank discussions about reality and things like that. And then it just turns out all those things have completely shifted. And so I haven't shifted. I just see those views and my values are now probably better expressed on the center liberal right than, the sort of more center liberal left now. And so that's kind of where I see myself politically. I tend to align more with Republicans on average who still have that liberal sort of value thing, like the Chris Rufos of the world. And
you mean classical liberal?
Yeah, like a classic liberal. In the U.S., we say liberal, and a lot of people just think Democrat. But no, there's like actual liberalism as sort of a political ideology or sort of moral value, a way you can see the world and the individual, sort of free markets and that type of thing, individual liberty, property rights, that type of stuff. So that's where I am now. I'm pretty politically homeless. I don't consider myself like a Republican. Well, I've never really considered myself a Democrat. It's just I voted for the party that best expressed my morals and views. Right now, that is more the Republican Party. Although I'm very not a Trump fan, and I don't know if I could bring myself to vote for Donald Trump. So I don't know. I might sit this one out and see how things run, but it's definitely pretty wild. And yeah, politically homeless is a good descriptor for how I feel right now.
Well, I mean, what's it like? Unfortunately, you did not move to Austin. you moved to Nashville, so I don't get to see you. But so I don't know, what's it like politically around there? I know Nashville's a little bit liberal, but it's in a sea of red.
It's been great so far. I still have sort of this this leftover hesitancy to talk about these topics with people who I just meet. When they ask, what do you do? It's just like, oh God, how do I tell them what I do and what I write about? Because if you did that in California, like odds are that the person is going to start screaming at you or something. And here that hasn't been the case, but I still feel like that fear of like, oh God, how do I describe my job to this person? Even though they're much more likely to be like, oh yeah, like that makes a lot of sense. I even felt that when I was at this like Nashville hunters and anglers meetup thing, and it was a bunch of people and like wearing camo vests and stuff like that and talking about guns. And at first I still found myself like, oh, should I talk about what I talk about? Like, no, they were all clearly on board with everything I was talking about. So yeah, it's been great in Nashville. I do also love Austin, and I need to make it out there, but yeah, Nashville's a great town.
Yeah. So you've had I guess like this inadvertent journey, and I know that you're big on Twitter/X. That's where I see you. You rocketed up to fame and infamy, and a lot of it is through beefs and conflicts and getting involved in these sometimes internecine conflicts. I guess. Like let's see, you're at like 200K followers, bro. Like you're way ahead of me now. But it's
crazy.
Controversy sells, beefs sell. So I'm not surprised. And you got.
Well, I try not to get involved in mudslinging. I mean, I'm pretty, at least the way I think, I'm pretty just dry on Twitter. I'm just like, males and females are real. I just call out like, here's a weird paper about is non-binary. So
you're offensive because of your substance, not your style.
Yeah.
I think I'm both. Like I'm pretty aggressive with people, as you've probably seen. You're very, very mild mannered compared to me, but you say shocking things like, yeah, there's two sexes in humans. But then you get like caught up in some sort of storms, and you got like all the academics frothing at their mouths saying you're not really an evolutionary biologist, and or like he actually studies behavioral ecology. That's totally different. I mean, obviously they're stupid. But in any case, so I mean that's what you're getting involved in, and then there's this whole IDW faction that obviously you were orbiting around there. Like you were not profiled, but and that kind of like collapsed. Can you talk about what's going on with that? Because like I'm not, I'm friends with a lot of those guys, but I'm not like part of it. Like what's happening there? Like what is the state in 2024, Colin?
Oh, I mean, the whole IDW thing, I never saw it as like a cohesive group. It was just sort of a bunch of heterodox thinkers. And the only thing they had in common was that they would be like willing to speak to people who they disagree with and air these disagreements and agree to disagree, that type of thing. Just like, hey, let's talk about it. Let's not cancel people for having views we disagree with, even vehemently disagree with. That has since sort of fractured more. I know that there's some people who don't want to talk to each other. Like Sam Harris doesn't want to talk to Brett Weinstein about some of his views. And there's probably other weird, dynamics of people not talking to each other. So that's completely broken down. I mean, I still follow a lot of them independently. There's some, maybe not so much anymore, but they're all interesting people. I think it's still good to follow and at least hear what they have to say. But yeah, it's not like all these people had any coherence or had any affinity based on like shared views, except for sort of the anti-cancel culture type stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I follow some of these people. I don't know them well. I mean, I've DM'd with Brett a little, but basically, Sam Harris is basically a normie liberal. He's a system guy. He supports the system. Again, I respect his courage, and he's like expressed some taboo viewpoints. We don't need to get into the details there, but I'm not saying that he's some sort of just normie generic person. Like he does put himself out there, but he is a kind of like, I don't know, he's not a partisan Democrat necessarily, but he's a conventional liberal, very, very anti-Trump. Like you expressed a strong ambivalence, let's put it mildly, to Trump, but I mean Sam Harris is way more extreme about that. And so aside from he has some heterodoxies. He's still more aggressive at Islam than a liberal would be. He's engaged with Charles Murray and said some things positive about that. But In general, he's down the line, Biden bro, right? Then you have Brett, who, as of this recording, was just on InfoWars with Alex Jones.
Saw that, yeah.
And so that is a migration, so to speak, from, again, a Bernie bro in 2016, professor at Evergreen State. And some of the stuff Brett says, like, I'm not gonna lie, it's kind of weird. The Chinese invasion thing. Have you heard that?
I did, yeah. Can't say
Actually,
I agree.
Yeah, can you tell them what it was? It's just funny. I'm sorry, like, Brett, like, I'm not hating here, but it's just like, I'm sorry, I just laughed when I heard it because, like, Brett, I don't buy this, and I think it's funny. So just tell them what that is.
Yeah, I'll try to restate it as clearly as I can, but I think he went to the southern border where he saw that there are a lot of Chinese people that were coming over. He looked at this then in the context of China's like one child policy, which tended to favor males. They would sometimes abort females who were there so they could, I think, to push on the family name type of thing, or they wanted someone to work around the farm or whatever it was. And so rather than seeing this as just sort of like a bad policy thing that is they're reaping sort of consequences for, he's suggesting maybe that this is a higher level, like above the species level, like at the lineage level adaptation to produce a disproportionate number of males in preparation for war. That is it's a fun idea. It's one of those like group selection type things that I think it's a fun thing to think about. And, but there's almost certainly no evidence to suggest that this is going on. Again, it's just because it's like a possible thing. I don't think it's plausible. And, Brett expressed that this like kept him up at night, that he was very fearful about this. I think it's so fantastical, even if it's in the realm of possibility, it's not in the realm of plausibility. And so I couldn't see myself being kept up at night by pondering such things. I think you can explain it with much more, proximate causes.
Here's the thing, Colin. You're laughing now, or you're like expressing some serious skepticism. But what if 1 month from now you wake up and you and Christina are frog marched to a vast hall where you're forced to eat dim sum?
Well, then I will apologize to Brett. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know. I started laughing when I heard it. I'm not gonna lie.
I like Brett too. This isn't a personal thing at all. I just and I wouldn't have expressed that view myself with such giving it as much credit.
IDW, we got a comedian in the house. I don't know, man. So I mean, take it for what it is, Brett. I mean, we're not trying to be dicks, but like I just keeping it real. I'm gonna be honest. I thought it was kind of funny. Okay, so there's these internecine conflicts. You're still tight with Lindsay. Can you? I'm asking you this because like I don't know what the hell's going on. Oh, I will tell us James Lindsay's story, which I have told people. I think it was like we were in a group chat. I'm not going to say which one, but you might know a bit about this. But I told Lindsay at the end of 2019, I think it was over Christmas, I'm like, you're going to be hanging out with Christian evangelicals soon, and he laughed at me because Lindsay is a hardcore new atheist, he comes out of that movement like explicitly. And that's what he was doing a couple of years later.
Yeah, I mean, I've given talks in churches, and I get invited out to these groups and stuff because they want to hear about sort of sex and gender things. So it's bizarre.
Well, because like God created man and woman, right? I mean, it's just in the Bible.
Yeah, that's the other half. I get like they support me because they're just like God created man and woman. That's the sex binary. That's all they need to know. I just try to tell them that like, well, okay, you can believe that, and at least we're at the same endpoint, but you don't need to believe in sort of the biblical reasons in order to understand that there's two sexes. Like there's actually good evidential grounds for this as well. So I try to give them, at least arm them with that. So they're not out there just talking to the libs and then just saying that, God made it this way, because that's not going to work. So I'm trying to arm them with the actual facts and evidence.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, so James, I don't know. I swear to God, like he is, all right, so I'm going to do the King James Version because I like that translation, because I'm a boomer, I guess. What is it? Okay, this is like quote about Ishmael. And he will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. So I just think of that when I see what's happening with James Lindsay, because, one day he's like going off against like the critical race theorists and Marxists and stuff like that. Then the next day I see the far right is attacking him. Then the next day I see him like facing off against the center right. I don't even know, man, like how many different beefs. Like he is a beef machine. And I'm not talking about his beefy thighs, which he is also talking about,
No, he's a savant, and he just like is jujitsuing everyone coming at him from all different directions. I don't know how he does it. I love James. He's such a good dude. He's spicy on Twitter, and I can't say I like every single thing he tweets, but in person we're good buds. He's a great guy. He gets a lot of hate, but he's such a good dude. And brilliant. Like he's super smart.
Yeah, just so just so you guys know, the listeners out there who don't follow all these ins and outs, Lindsay was a co-author of the conceptual penis paper. So, that's how kind of his turn. I mean, earlier, did he write a book about atheism or
he did in the past? Yeah, he wrote a book about sort of God and all that stuff. He was sort of a new atheist writer. I didn't read his books back then. I didn't know him too much, but I had like heard his name. But
so he comes out of he's got a bunch of like books now, or he's a contributor to a bunch of books about whatever, like critical theory, social justice, all these other things. But he also is like God doesn't, we do, everything is wrong about God. So,
but he gives most of his talks at churches now, which is really funny.
That's what I'm saying. So everything is wrong about God was published. The paperback was 2015, right? So it must have been like a couple of years, a year earlier for hardcover. So like 10 years later now, he is like part of. So I saw James Lindsay being mentioned in some internecine conflict between Christian nationalist evangelicals and anti-Christian nationalist evangelicals. And the anti-Christian nationalist evangelicals are like using Lindsay in some way or collaborating with him. And I thought this is what happened. I saw an explanation of what happened recently. This is like very, very deep in the weeds, but I think it's just like interesting because I know some of these people because I'm pretty far right in a lot of ways, or I have like, I go to, I know people that are on the far right. That's what I'll say, right? I myself am probably center right in most of my views, but whatever, socially moderate, and it's hard to average things out. There's some things where I'm like right wing, some things where I'm left wing, probably. But anyway, let's just like set me aside. So he went to some Claremont conference, and I have gone to Claremont conferences. I'm friends with a lot of people at the Claremont Institute. It's diverse, but right now it does have kind of an air of like Christian nationalism about it, even though they have a lot of Catholics who are not Christian nationalists, because Christian nationalism tends to be a Calvinist reformed project in the United States. There's a group, New Founding, in Dallas, and apparently like someone got up and said like he should be forcibly converted to Christianity in the Christian Nationalist Republic, and James got offended by that. And I get why he's offended. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I'm gonna like straight up say it. Those guys are LARPers. Like they ain't converting no one. Okay, because I go to these conferences and they talk about how non-Christians should be second-class citizens. What they mean by non-Christians are people who are not Calvinist Christians. Calvinist Christians are like 10% of America's population or something, So it's like this is just a LARP. Honestly, I'm going to be honest. I tell them to their face, like I don't really care. I mean, I agree with you on like a lot of cultural issues, all this extra stuff, like whatever. This is like Harvard communists like fantasizing about the Marxist utopia. It's not going to happen. I'm not worried. So I wouldn't have gotten offended. I just would have laughed. But apparently James said he got offended. And so that started a beef because he's still an atheist. And, you have like all these like weird, strange bedfellows. And then it turns out, oh, actually, like you guys totally disagree on everything. Yeah. Well, I mean, he hasn't like, I don't know. And also I don't understand, like, James is new to these like circles. So I think I'm going to be doing a little psychoanalyzing. I think part of his beefing with people on the right is because he's a newcomer and he's shocked at some of the stupid things from his perspective that they say. I would not be shocked because I've always been there, you know? I'm just like, yeah, like they're going to say like weird things like this that are just like, okay, like that's insane, you know? I mean, it's like whatever. If you go to some left-wing conferences, people will say weird things too. Like they're going to confiscate all the guns, you know? Or something like that, you know? Or like ban fossil fuel cars that run on fossil fuel. Like there's people that say that, you know? And you just laugh it off because you know it's a joke.
Yeah, I mean, I still have these moments too where like I'm somewhat shocked when I hear what people believe on the right. Like that's crazy. I don't want to associate myself with that. But then I think again, like, well, I'm here because I was responding to like some even more insane crap coming from the left about, you know, the reality distorting stuff about sex and gender and all that stuff. So, you know, there's never going to be a group that's going to be perfectly aligned with everything you believe in, and it's really just a cost benefit thing. I mean, I was at a recent summit. I won't say who it was by because it's kind of private thing, but I went there. There were a lot of Christian conservatives there. And some of them, you know, I was on there to talk about the biology of sex and what males and females are and all that stuff. And I, you know, talked about them in terms of them being evolved reproductive strategies. And then some people after the talk were very offended that I even like brought up evolution in the first place. And it's just like, okay, well, I'm an evolutionary biologist. I don't know what to tell you. I'm just going to say it like it is. I'm not going to change. And I do try to make sure that I don't sort of not say evolution or something when I'm in a church and things like that. I'm just going to say what I actually think about it, and people can talk to me after. And if they want to talk about evolution or why they don't like it, then I'm happy to have that conversation too. So, yeah, I just try to be as like authentic as I can in these situations and not, you know, because I'm done with the whole like hiding what I think about reality from certain groups, because that's what I was doing on the left for a while, and I'm not about to start doing that on the right now or any other group. So, yeah, you just have to get used to being around people who disagree with you, and yeah, people are going to try to, you know, use you for their own ends, but I'm using them for my own ends too. And I'm going on their platforms so I can try to convince other people. There's nothing you can do about it. There shouldn't, you know, if you're going to require like some ideological purity test, and you're never going to go anywhere. You're just going to sit at home and stare at your wall and not have any influence whatsoever.
Amen, brother. Amen. I get it. Okay, so I'm, you know, obviously, we've been talking for a while. You know, I'll be respectful of your time, as they say in the business. So I want to wind down, but I want to talk about your book, which, you know, someday maybe I too will be a book writer. You know, but people ask me about that. But you're coming home stretch. You are writing a book. It's titled "Let's Talk About Sex." No, I'm just joking. I don't know what it's titled, but I think that would be a great topic. I think it'd be a great title, or like maybe as a summit. Let's talk about sex. You and me. I don't know. So yeah, talk about your book, where you're going, but let's talk about your book. What's going on?
So, I mean, it's going to be no surprise that this is a book that's on the topic of what biological sex is and how people are distorting it, and why it matters that we understand what males and females are in society. I'm hoping it's just going to be sort of a one-stop shop where you can go to it if you want to see why all the arguments out there are for non-binary sex. I will basically summarize and debunk every single one of them. And there's quite a lot because they take a lot of different forms. So the beginning just talks about sort of the evolution of the two sexes and sexual dimorphism, and, you know, how this influences the behavior and physiology and everything of animals, and how like it creates a enormous diversity of body types and all these things. But, you know, there's still like the two fundamental sexes. And then the second part of the book really goes into the weeds and the details of like what the sex binary means, why sex isn't a spectrum, why it's not a social construct. It debunks Fasto Sterling's 5 sexes. You know, the idea that, you know, sexes is rooted in, by chromosomes, and there's maybe 7 sexes because there's 7 different types of, viable sex chromosome combinations. Debunks the bird with 4 sexes and the 4-sexed ant species, and why they're just sort of misinterpreting what the word sex means. You know, everything in the weeds, but hopefully written in an engaging way where people will keep reading and learning stuff. It's not going to be too sort of lofty and academic sounding, but hopefully it's academic and precise enough where people understand what I'm not. You know, you're going to have a pretty full understanding of what sex is, and then, you know, the consequences for this, why this is happening, what is gender ideology trying to subvert all this stuff, and why it's important to push back on this. I stay out of politics completely. You should be able to read it from anywhere on the political spectrum, and learn from it. And that's the idea.
Well, okay, so I want to like talk a little bit about the science. Just I do think it's interesting. Again, I don't have like a strong I don't care. I mean, I've read about the evolution of sex, for decades. Super interesting. Everyone should check out Narrow Roads of Geneland, Volume 2 and Volume 3, especially Volume 2. W.D. Hamilton's series of collected papers on the evolution of sex. This is not a complicated topic. There's not like a first massive chapter or prologue about what sex is in these books that are published from like 20 years ago and that are following a tradition that's been going on for decades. Like people just know, it wasn't like complicated in the past. Okay. So setting that aside, you talked about gametes. So gametes is, obviously sperm and eggs. These are the singular copy in diploid organisms. Not everything is diploid, but in diploid, so two copies of a gene by Mendel's law of segregation. You have like one copy that's sampled out of the parents. They come together, right? And so sperm is haploid. It has one copy. And then eggs are also haploid. They have one copy, right? So the copies come together and create a diploid human. And so this is interesting because it de-emphasizes chromosomes, which I think is actually useful because a lot of people don't know this, but there's different chromosomal arrangements for creating the two sexes in different parts of the animal kingdom, across the tree of life. So in birds, females are the heterogametic sex. So they're the ones, I think it's like ZW and ZZ. Okay, so females are ZW and males are ZZ. So it means that sex-linked diseases in birds are through the female. Females are the sex that has the breakdown because of the recessive sex-linked diseases, and that causes some differences in various. I don't want to get into evolutionary genetics of it. The point is, sex chromosomes themselves evolve. They tend to usually the non-recombining one, which in humans is the Y. The one that's kind of the deviation and has very few genes, most of them involved in sex, that tends to eventually decay and disappear because of Muller's ratchet. Like you guys can look it up, or the lack of Muller's ratchet. Then you have to have a new sex chromosome. So our sex chromosome has been degrading. The Y is a really crap piece of genetic information, has very few genes. It's filled with repetitive elements, et cetera, et cetera. So eventually it will disappear and something new will evolve. But the maintenance of the production of the gametes is by necessity maintained, because otherwise you wouldn't have a lineage, right? So you'll figure out new ways to do the same thing. The key is you have large gametes and small gametes. And that just seems to be pretty common across the tree of life. I've never thought about it in detail, actually. But, this is true in plants too. Plants also have the same dynamic.
Yeah, it's the universal defining characteristic of male or female is the relative size of your gametes. You pointed out sort of in humans and birds, we have chromosomal sex determination, and other species do it differently. Turtles and alligators, they don't have sex chromosomes at all. Like whether they develop into males or females is determined by the temperature that their eggs are incubated at. So I really try to distinguish between how sex is determined, mechanistically, developmentally, versus how sex is defined, which is by the type of gamete that you have the function to produce. A lot of people will read, sex is determined by chromosomes, and they'll think in their mind, colloquial meaning of determined, mean that's like sex is defined by chromosomes. But then, no, we have no problem determining the sex of a turtle or an alligator because their sex is basically what type of gamete they're producing, not the temperature that they were incubated at. Like those help cause a embryo to develop down a pathway that will result in males and females, but they aren't the defining feature of being a male and female. So yeah, that's a point that I try to make as clear as possible in my book. The upstream mechanisms that lead to sex, and then there's sex itself, and then there's all the downstream consequences of sex and sexual dimorphism and behavioral differences. And animals can do this other way, and sex role reversals in certain species depending on ecological factors. There's all crazy diversity, the mechanisms and the downstream consequences aren't binary, but the sex definitely is, because there's only those two gametes.
So, here's the final question. Dr. Wright, is there life after sex?
Absolutely, 100%.
What's your life after sex gonna be like? I mean, like, what? I mean, I know that you're whiskey or gin. Like, you like to make alcohol. I mean, I know that you're Dr. Colin Wright is a fully featured person. He is not simply a sexaholic. There are other things you're interested in. But people ask me, they're like, Colin seems fine, but like, someday, like, we're not going to want to talk about this. So
I think,
now you're full-fledged public intellectual. So where are you going now? Because or maybe you're gonna go to the alcohol business. I don't know.
I mean, could be. I would love to start a distillery sometime in the future, but I think we'll be talking about the sex thing for at least another 5 years to a decade in terms of like getting this out of law. I mean, a lot of what I do right now, working for the Manhattan Institute, is involved in getting policy changed. I'm doing a lot of expert testimony for court cases. I just testified actually in Texas for SB 14, where I was cross-examined by a bunch of ACLU lawyers in my face about why sex isn't defined by, gamete production, that type of thing. That was entertaining. I wrote about it on my Substack. I put the whole transcript on there if anyone wants to read that. But the Heritage Foundation has recently put out something called the Defining Sex Act, which is model legislation that only a couple states have taken up right now, but it's I think around 20 or more are set to be taking this up this year. And I'm basically their go-to boy for defending this type of stuff. So I'll be doing a lot of expert testimony, both, written and in court. So I'll be super busy on this stuff. And there's going to be tons of challenges. And so I think I'll be busy for the next several years doing this. Hopefully the book does well and I can not have to do this my entire life. But I think, we'll be grappling with it to at least some degree for a while. And then, I've always kept my ear to the culture war stuff. And I think I have, ideas to lend to other topics as well, even though I'll try to stick to biological issues as much as possible. We're probably going to see a resurgence of, intelligent design creationism and stuff at some point as the right gains more political power. And so maybe I'll have to pivot to that again and I'll get exiled from the right and go back to the left. And who knows? I think we'll see. I'll be doing something for sure.
Yeah, you definitely will be doing something for sure. So, everybody, someday, soon, there will be a book, you can order online at various forms. I gotta say, I ordered a book off Barnes & Noble because something was back, this is like totally random, but I'm going to keep it in the podcast because this is what really exercises me. Okay. I go to order a book at Barnes & Noble for my kid because it's like, it's going to take too long from Amazon. Barnes & Noble's website sucks. I'm just saying, like, if you're competing with Amazon, at least like employ some devs because it was like a pain in the butt to order the book. And I'm like, I mean, come on, man, who's working? I mean, you're a big company. Like, yeah, I'm just like, oh my God, like, why are you making it difficult for me to order the damn book? And it was an expensive book. You were gonna get money out of it, anyway. So that's like editorializing. So yeah, it's been great talking to you. Excited about everything you're doing. Obviously the Substack, Reality's Last Stand, there's a link to it. You're working for the Manhattan Institute, various ways to, people can support you. We didn't talk too much about your Quillette years, but you were an editor there. You've been now through the trenches and kind of gone upward and onward. I'm proud to call you a friend. Also, I am, I don't want to say proud, but like, I respect your courage. Although like, again, it's courage in the face of absurdity a lot of times. So it's like,
yeah,
kind of a backhanded compliment, It's like,
yeah. But, I mean, the people I'm against are like very, very clownish. It's not like anyone had a gun to my head, but they did, try to go after my career. So, and probably
they went after your career. You have a new career now because they went after your career, and that's you will be known for that. Actually, let me just check really quickly before we check out. Let's just see what is it? Okay, I'm just checking what exile. What's exile lifestyle?
Exile Lifestyle. Is there an article about me in Exile Lifestyle?
No, it's by Colin Wright. There's a
Oh,
doctor. There's another Colin Wright on Google.
yeah, there's a couple.
But you're Dr. Colin Wright. I mean, that's your website.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
got the Manhattan Institute page.
Yep.
Author, speaker, West Bend, Wisconsin. Yeah, that's a different. Yours is a common name. You're mostly it's you, but there's random other people. I'm just
Yeah.
curious, like, so you don't have like who is this guy?
I've been trying to get like a Google thing, but it's for some reason it hasn't been working. Like I
Yeah, this
created a whole
Colin is my
card.
name. Yeah, so there's Colin, Colin.substack. This guy is a whole like thing. So anyway, there's other Colin Wrights, but you don't have like too much like nasty stuff written about you. That's what I'm checking. So good for you, Colin. I think you're doing good work, and you're making a life out of it. Maybe it's like a role model for other scientists who want to speak up. I don't know. I know science communication, whatever you want to call it, is a big thing now. You are going to get incoming, but that's life, and
Yep.
you're making a good life out of it in Tennessee, in Central Tennessee, and having fun, enjoying yourself, and maintaining your integrity. That's what it's all about, man. So
Thanks, man.
I've kept you here for a while. Everyone, check out the Substack, and it was my pleasure talking to you. My pleasure knowing you, and I'll see you online, man.
Thanks, Razib. Always a pleasure coming on.
Whole genome sequencing is used for adults and children every day to assess risk for thousands of diseases. Orchid, a genetics company led by scientists from Stanford, is able to do this for IVF embryos. Now, instead of waiting for a diagnosis, parents can assess if their embryos have genetic variants known to cause severe conditions before their child's even born. No other tests can detect these issues so thoroughly or so early. So check them out at orchidhealth.com.
This podcast for kids